All right, take one. Disclosure Day on Earth School Radio. Let me get a little sip of my coffee. All right, everybody. Got my coffee, got my Men in Black glasses, and I'm ready to talk about some disclosure, okay? So, everybody's talking about the government secrets and the alien narrative in Disclosure Day. Well, I went on Friday, and I've been sitting with it for about 4 or 5 days now, and today I'm talking about it. There's a story within the story that I'm breaking down into 4 specific takeaways from the movie that really put a different perspective on the whole disclosure topic. This one's gonna be good. Let's get into it right now. Hey everybody, it's me, Sheila. I've got my Disclosure Men in Black glasses on because it kind of fits with me talking about Disclosure Day, the new Steven Spielberg movie. Also, today is a moment for me to remember that it is my last podcast that I'm going to be recording in the RV because I'm heading home in 2 days. So I'm going to head home. I might record another one in the RV. I don't know. But I will be at home. So I'm planning on getting my studio together. Should I take these off? Or should I leave them on for the whole episode? I'll take them off. Anyway, I'm super pumped about this one today, guys. So, for anybody who hasn't listened to the podcast before, this is Earth School Radio, a place where we talk about what it's like to be human in this wild ride called Earth. And I'm your host, Sheila Say, and I'm really, really glad you're here. So let's get into it. Today we're talking about Disclosure Day. And before we get started, I want to, fair warning, there are absolutely spoilers in this episode. So if you haven't seen the movie and you want to experience it fresh, go watch the movie and then make sure that you come back because I am definitely going to talk about the ending, but I want to compare notes. I want you to tell me if you kind of line up with what my interpretation is. So first off, let's just acknowledge how bizarre reality is right now. It is like we're talking about this movie, Disclosure, but it's actually paralleling exactly kind of what's happening in our world. We have, in Washington in the last week or so, you have congressional conversations about UAPs and about plasmoids and about non-human intelligence. You've got David Grush making headlines. And then there's, Dr. Stephen Greer. He's continuing to push the conversation. There's more and more politicians that are stepping forward. There's this Tim Burchett from Tennessee, Anna Paulina Luna, multiple politicians that are like, look, we know this is real because we've been briefed, okay? And so anyway, so that's crazy. That's happening. Open discussion of things that would have sounded completely insane just a few years ago. And then right now, right in the middle of all of that, Steven Spielberg's got this movie called Disclosure Day, and it's dropped in theaters right now. The timing is just, crazy. It's wild, to say the least. So we have the movie Disclosure Day and the reality of actual disclosure happening. I went on Friday on opening day, and I've been thinking about the movie ever since. I've been purposefully, though, not looking at anybody else's perspective because I really did want to tap into what my own intuition was telling me about it. So I've been just having these little philosophical conversations with my chat GPT and, posing questions and formulating what I'm thinking. And I think I really tapped into something here. I feel like the bigger message isn't just that, this isn't just another alien movie. I really feel like there's a story underneath it, and eventually I started to kind of crack the code about what the message really is. And so I'm going to lay that out. But before I get into it, my 4 big takeaways, let me just kind of rebrief you. Let me give you the quick and dirty version of the plot, just to kind of set the stage, because Disclosure Day follows these 2 ordinary people, Daniel and Margaret, who become connected to this truth that has been hidden for decades, right? Daniel is a cybersecurity expert and a scientist. He's like this former hacker who's hired by this shadowy government agency called Wardex. And he goes rogue after he's just, he's told by this other guy in the agency that there's this, massive cover up, these hugely dark secrets about extraterrestrial life. And so Daniel attempts to be a whistleblower throughout the movie. Then there's this other character, Margaret. She's a local meteorologist who becomes an accidental whistleblower after she develops these supernatural abilities. And her and Daniel kind of team up with several of the other rogue Ward X agents to expose everything. And throughout the movie, they are hunted like animals by this powerful organization whose entire mission is keeping humanity from discovering the truth about extraterrestrial contact. And the deeper that those 2 dig, the more obvious it becomes that Wardex and the government are willing to do absolutely anything to keep the secret buried. And honestly, it wasn't the cover-up that surprised me. I've, been around this conversation long enough that the idea of secret programs and hidden information and powerful people trying to control a narrative wasn't shocking to me. What surprised me, though, was how much emphasis that Spielberg put on it. Because the movie doesn't, just casually mention the cover-up. It's literally what's driven home over and over again. It's the whole, first half of the movie is all about, the links that this agency will go to, the surveillance, the intimidation, the secrecy, the pressure applied to anybody who gets too close. It is woven throughout the entire story. And it's very interesting that it was the focus of the movie. I was sitting there thinking of all the directions that this movie could have gone in. Spielberg really, really wants people paying attention to this part. And whether you agree with that premise or not, the movie makes one thing very, very clear. The cover-up is the story. But the cover-up is actually what leads to the most important thing. It's the first domino to, which brings me to fall, which brings me to takeaway number 1. Okay, takeaway number 1 is, I'm going to call it the cover-up. The cover-up is the real starting point of the story. It's not just about whether something exists out there, but the gargantuan freaking effort that has gone into keeping it hidden and classified. And keep in mind, this is exactly what's playing out in real time right now in our world. Most of this movie isn't actually spent showing aliens at all. Spielberg spends over 2 hours, showing us the heavy machinery of secrecy, the relentless surveillance and intimidation, the dark, off-the-books programs. This is exactly what's happening in real life. I can't tell you how long I've listened to Stephen Greer talk about how our own government has back-engineered UAPs, has back-engineered these spaceships from recovered craft that we've shot down. There's a whole bunch of information that I have been privy to because I've looked for it, that maybe the rest of people who haven't really paid attention are just finding out through this movie. And I think that was really, really beautifully done, okay? The people whose entire 24/7 job in the movie is making sure that none of the information ever reaches the public. And this Wardex operates entirely in the shadows. Nobody really knows who they are or that they even exist. Okay, they've recovered craft, they've recovered beings, they control the narrative, they monitor anybody who gets close, and they take them out. And then Daniel and Margaret aren't running from aliens in the movie. They're running from the people trying to keep humanity dumb, from finding out that all of this, conspiracy theory stuff actually exists. And every single time that they get a step closer to the truth, the pressure increases. The message in the movie at this point is that it's not just a secret, it's the secret. It is paramount to anything else. So the question that I asked is, what was it about that information? Because I'm kind of like, it's blurred lines, really. It's the fact that this is actually really happening. So you have to kind of look at it and you're like, okay, this is a fictional movie, but at the same time, it's like, okay, he's telling us, what's happening. So, my question is, why, in reality, is this secret so profound that they would go to these insane lengths to keep it hidden? Okay, let's talk about, just for example, the scientists that are working on, anti-gravity technology, or any other scientist that's gone anywhere near UAPs or alien life or extraterrestrial life or dimensional realities or anything like that. For some reason, we have this rash of those types of people disappearing or offing themselves, and I think that's very, very strange. And that's when it hit me. The cover-up itself becomes the ultimate clue. That piqued my curiosity. Why is the secret so important from their perspective? And that's where my mind went. Not towards fear, towards curiosity, right? Everything we've ever learned or achieved as a species came from somebody who followed their curiosity. And that's where the movie stopped being pure entertainment, for me. And in reality, it started to become a mirror. And, that's really the takeaway number 2. I call it, take a look in the mirror, because here's the thing. The aliens aren't the scary part of this movie. We are. Humanity is. In the film, it holds up to us, to humanity, to allow us an opportunity to check ourselves, to reflect. And I don't mean that as an attack on humanity. I mean it as an open invitation to look a little deeper. Because honestly, what do we do when we're confronted with something that doesn't, make sense to us or that we don't understand? Well, for one, we immediately consider it a threat, usually. Our knee-jerk reaction is to try and control something or contain it or manage it or hide it or say it's not true or don't believe it or make whatever. I'm not just talking about government behavior. It's a fundamental human behavior. We do it in our personal lives all the time. When a new idea challenges us, or when an uncomfortable truth surfaces, or when life gives us something that doesn't fit neatly into our way of thinking or seeing the world, our first instinct usually isn't curiosity. Tell me about it. What can I learn from this? It's usually to control it in some way. Think about politics right now. Bang my head up against the freaking wall. You have to think like me, and if you don't, I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to call you every name in the book. I'm going to make sure that everybody that I know thinks you're a piece of shit. I mean, kind of, that's what's happening. It happens a lot in our society when it comes to differences in opinions on anything. Seems like a lot of people feel like they need to control what others think, and if they don't agree, then there's this barrage of ways to punish them, from cancel culture to outright freaking bullying and all that kind of stuff. And the movie holds that mirror up beautifully. It forces us to ask, how do we respond to the unknown? Do we close down? Do we go into fear? Or do we open up? Fear closes the door, but curiosity opens the door. And quite frankly, growth requires openness. Learning something new requires you to be open. And true connection to people, to ourselves, requires openness. So, Spielberg isn't actually asking us to examine what's out there in the deep universe. Okay? He's asking us to examine how we respond when we encounter something bigger than our current understanding. And if we can drop into the need for control and reflect on that, that's when our true potential is unlocked. Okay? So then we get further into the movie, into the last half, and the third takeaway that I have come away with, I'm going to call it the two gifts. Okay, so as the movie progresses, it becomes clear to the world that we are on the brink of World War III. And it's really real in the movie. So everybody's freaking out. They're, plundering the local gas station for water and anything else that they can get their hands on. And, the movie really kind of sends this message that it's kind of weaving it through, that if Daniel and Margaret can defy Wardex and release all of the files on the cover-up, that it may help to stop this, to stop the war, right? So that's kind of fueling their urgency. And this was my favorite part of the movie, because underneath all of the secrecy and the, cover-ups, the story ultimately comes down to these two human beings, Daniel and Margaret. And this is where Spielberg drops the most profound lore of the entire film. We get to just about the third act, and we learn this massive truth that Daniel and Margaret weren't chosen at random. They just didn't randomly have these gifts. You find out that back in 1996, when they were little kids, they were both abducted by these extraterrestrial beings. But they weren't taken to be harmed. They weren't experimented on. They were given an upgrade, which I believe happens. I believe that happens. So they were imprinted with two specific, but complementary cosmic gifts to prepare them to be the ultimate human translators for the disclosure event that's, building up at the end of the movie. Margaret's gift that she received was empathy. And because of that childhood encounter, she has this form of emotional telepathy that she can just look into a person's eyes and instantly feel their deepest fears and their history and everything that they've experienced, and just get like an instant emotional snapshot of their soul imprint. And Daniel's gift, on the other hand, is understanding. He's this brilliant cybersecurity expert, and his mind is hardwired for logic and interpretation. He can look at complex alien data and decode the how everything works, right? He understands very complex concepts, like Albert Einstein stuff. One understands through connection and the other through interpretation. One operates through their heart and the other through their mind. And here is where this matters for us, and why I believe that this is what will ultimately change humanity. The movie shows us that the aliens didn't hand Daniel and Margaret weapons to fight the government, and they didn't give them, advanced technology to save the planet. Okay, there's no big cosmic war going to happen to, free humanity. They gave them the tools of communication, because the film is making this massive statement. Humanity cannot evolve to the next level of consciousness using the same old tools of fear and control. We are constantly taught in our society to choose logic or intuition, mind or heart, science or spirituality. But that's a false choice. That's what the narrative is pushing at us. Those we have to choose. If we only approach the unknown with Daniel's understanding, pure logic, without a soul, we become cold and analytical and disconnected. We treat things as data points to be managed. And then at the same time, if we approach everything with Margaret's empathy only, pure emotion without discernment from our mind, we can easily get overwhelmed. She has this massive panic attack. She's feeling so much from everybody. She can't handle it. She has to have some discernment, right? You feel ungrounded and you can be misled easily if that's all you're leading with. But when empathy meets understanding, that is the exact formula for wisdom. The integration is actually what changes humanity. It's allowed Daniel and Margaret to bypass the government's threats and broadcast the truth to the entire world. He's got all this intellectual know-how on how to release the actual information, how to tap into the systems and the satellites and all of that. And she's got this ability to connect with people that may block their way. So she's connecting with people and telling them. It's kind of like a couple of the scenes were kind of like in Star Wars when they say these are not the droids you're looking for. Not exactly, but she kind of would come across a person that was trying to stop her from doing something, and she would just tell them something deeply that only they would connect with, that really meant something, and they just basically was like, okay, you go ahead. So that was interesting. But Spielberg's showing us how to survive our future and whatever's waiting for us out there in the stars. But if we're going to move forward, we have to stop letting our minds and our hearts fight with each other. We have to integrate them. We have to learn to utilize both. They weren't given superpowers. They were shown human potential. And I love that. So from there, let's move ahead to the fourth and final takeaway. I'm going to just say, listen. It's the final word of the film. Because once you connect the mind and the heart, once you combine understanding and empathy, your entire relationship with the world changes. You stop reacting and you start paying attention. You start feeling things. You start discerning things. You stop relying on outside sources to tell you what to think, and you start really, working it through your own system. And that shift is exactly how Spielberg brings this entire concept to light. So we're in the final section of the movie, the ending of the film, and it gave me chills. Okay, the world is completely on edge, entirely glued to their TVs, because humanity is about to be on the brink of World War III. The tension's through the roof, and right in the middle of that peak panic of everybody, Daniel and Margaret take over the news station that Margaret works for. They go right to work. Daniel starts hacking into the satellites for every news channel across the globe, and he systematically uploads every single bit of classified material that Wardex and the government had been hiding from the world for 80 plus years. And they don't use their platform to scream or cause more chaos, okay? Instead, by combining their two gifts, Daniel's logical understanding and Margaret's deep empathy, they managed to do something incredible. They completely break through the lifelong conditioning, the narrative control, and the deep-seated fear of the unknown that Wardex and the government and, whoever else is involved in, weaponizing that against us. And the execution here is brilliant. Instead of us getting some, massive CGI showdown, the film actually forces everything to drop into this really profound and heavy silence. This scene is they're in this news studio, and the whole world is dropping what they're doing and is simultaneously watching on their phones, on their televisions, the real visual evidence of multiple crash sites, real stuff, non-human intelligence or aliens, whatever you want to call it, in medical laboratories being experimented on, like the footage like that they were hiding, that they were keeping classified, UAPs, like actual close-ups of them, that they were hiding. The whole freaking thing, the whole dark truth is coming out simultaneously. The screen goes quiet. There's really no dramatic music. It's just literally people stopping the panic and stepping back from the edge of war just for a second and listening to the truth. And that is the real kicker for me. We can't actually hear the truth until we learn how to quiet our fear. Think about how noisy our world is right now. We are constantly screaming over each other, arguing and drowning in political bullshit, right? If an alien tried to talk to us today, we'd probably just, drown him out with our own panic. We're so busy defending what we think we know that we don't leave any room to actually listen, which is my fourth takeaway. In the end of the movie, when the world finally shuts up and the fear drops, everything shifts. There's this realization that it's not an invasion. No one's invading us. In fact, we've been shooting down their craft and taking them prisoner. It's an invitation to wake up, to get the message. In order to get that message, you have to sit in the quiet, to drop the conditioning and just say, look, I don't know everything, but I'm ready to hear it. And so then we get to the actual ending. The world's on the absolute brink of war. The evidence has been blasted out to the public. And humanity's finally facing the reality that we're not alone. And then they reveal this being that was just released in the footage of being experimented on. That being is wheeled out in this wheelchair with this shroud over his head to protect him, and this living extraterrestrial that we saw in that dark room is brought out in front of the entire world. And in the movie theater, everybody's just literally just sitting on the edge of their seats in this moment, leaning forward and expecting the biggest, most monumental revelation in human history. My mind was racing. I was like, what kind of cosmic wisdom's about to drop? And what actually happens in the movie is the alien stands up and walks over to Daniel and whispers in his ear. And then Daniel stops, walks over to Margaret, whispers something in her ear. And then Margaret gathers herself, walks up, gets in front of the camera, right up to the lens. The entire freaking planet is holding its breath, and she says, listen. And boom, it cuts to black, and that's the end of the movie. And I was like, what the hell? I was kind of mad. And I went and I just allowed myself to just go, okay. And I got up, I left. I didn't hang out for very long. And for the last 4 days, I've really just been sifting through it. And that scene where she says, listen, and then everything stops and they cut to black. She was going to say something more, but it cuts it off, right? So that was purposeful because I think Spielberg was trying to say, this is the only thing that really matters. Listen. The point is, he just spent 2 hours showing us the message before the movie ever had to say it. And finally, humanity is invited to listen. When you actually look at that final scene, it's basically a giant game of telephone. It's this chain of understanding. It goes from the big message wasn't some dramatic final speech. It was how they delivered the speech. And over the last few days, after I kind of digested it, the more I realized that the universe doesn't download the truth into our brains the same way. We all have these our own little weird entry points. Like Daniel gets his data through language and logic. He's the, nerd decoding the matrix. And Margaret gets hers through raw emotion and empathy. She just feels it in her bones. And I really related to that. And honestly, that's exactly how real life is. Think about how we all just navigate our own spiritual journeys. Some of you get your life guidance through your gut intuition, and some of you have vivid dreams. Other people are really connected in meditation or prayer, or when you're painting. And other people have to literally go hug a tree in nature, or they experience some crazy flash of synchronicity that makes them go, damn, that just can't be happenstance, right? And then there's the skeptics who physically have to kind of smack themselves in the head with the truth before they believe it. Our pathways are all over the place. The language that we use to connect with something bigger varies. But the secret sauce is always the exact same thing. It's listening. And no, I don't mean listening with your actual ears. I mean tuning in with your awareness. All my talks about intuition and your higher self, it is this. It's giving your full undivided attention and having the actual willingness to open up to something that you didn't already know. And honestly, I feel like it's the lesson that our higher self's been freaking screaming at us to learn all along. Right? I mean, I've preached it till the cows come home. So anyway, my final thoughts about everything are, when you strip away the UFOs, the cover-ups, and the classified jargon, this movie really is just asking a basic human question. Can we still hear each other? Can we hear ourselves? Can we hear the deeper wisdom trying to crawl through all the noise? So at the start of the movie, or at the start of this episode, I said that the cover-up was the real story. But it was more like the thing that leads to the real story. The story of why they're so damn desperate to keep us in the dark. And it's not because they're trying to protect us from the mind melt of finding out that aliens are real. I think everybody's kind of past that, It's been so pervasive in our culture now for the last 5 years, It's this tiny nuanced piece that you'll miss if you're not paying attention. They're terrified of us discovering how powerful we as human beings actually are. This movie showed me that the government locks this stuff down because they know that if we had open contact, if we stopped being afraid and opened ourselves up to the possibility of more, of what we could understand and feel, humans would have a massive explosion of consciousness. We would lock into the oneness of everything, of our connection to each other. We would stop constantly trying to force everything into our own perception, and it would completely flip the script on what it means to be human. If we opened ourselves up to learning what we don't know, I believe it would unleash our actual abilities. We would see, our cosmic awareness open up. Things wouldn't sound so off the wall or strange anymore. We would start to understand it like Daniel. We would start to feel it like Margaret. And our empathy for every living thing would expand. And let's be real, a human race like that can't be controlled. Not anymore. Not by fear. Okay? That is the real disclosure. It's not that we aren't alone. It's that we have forgotten how deeply connected we already are to each other and to everything that exists. Everything. And you can take that lesson straight into your normal everyday life. That's where the real change happens. Finding solidarity with people around us instead of feeding the beast. Instead of playing into this constant division where we're told to pick a team and hate anyone who thinks differently, we can just choose a different path, because truth bomb, the exact same control system that's trying to keep us terrified of the unknown out there is the one feeding the division right here. Every single time you choose empathy over judgment or listening over fighting, you smash that conditioning. We don't need a spaceship to land to start expanding our minds and our hearts. We can do it right now by how we treat each other. We can choose solidarity over the noise. So what happens when we stop being afraid to know, to learn? Well, according to Disclosure Day, we step out of the shadows, we look at our own reflection, we hook up our minds and our hearts, and we finally learn to listen. I walked into that theater expecting a fun, sci-fi blockbuster movie, and I walked out with this realization that Spielberg just handed us a literal roadmap for human evolution. And, that's just my thoughts about the subject. I want to hear yours, right? If you've seen the movie, did it hit you the same way? What were your opinions? What did you think about it? What was the biggest takeaway that you got? Drop a comment or hit me up on socials. Let's just keep the conversation going, okay? Until next time, that's it for this episode of Earth School Radio. Thank you for hanging out with me. I've got a new sign off just for today's episode. I'm Sheila Say. Keep learning, keep your curiosity alive, and keep your hearts open. And remember to look up. Bye for now. See you later. Love you guys. I'm heading home to Cincinnati.